Here is something that will tell you everything you need to know about this story. A man worth $800 million is standing in a tiny apartment kitchen, holding a can of soup, squinting at the instructions on the back like he's never seen a can of soup in his life. He is wearing a gray hoodie that cost $15 from a street vendor. His jeans are dark and plain. His sneakers are black and scuffed. He has no phone on him, no wallet with a black card, no watch, no driver, none of the invisible scaffolding that holds up a life like his. He has $423 in cash stuffed in his front pocket and a handwritten room rental agreement sitting on the kitchen counter next to him. The apartment is small. The window in his room faces a brick wall. The lamp flickers when you first turn it on. The dresser has a drawer that doesn't close all the way. He fixed the drawer this morning. Nobody asked him to. And in the next room, on the other side of a thin wall, a young woman is lying on her couch with a fever, a tissue box, and a laptop, working on a story about a billionaire superstar who vanished from his own wedding yesterday and has not been seen since. She has spent 4 years covering this man. She can recognize him in any disguise. She has no idea he is standing 12 feet away, reading the back of a soup can. This is where our story begins. Not at the wedding, not at the rooftop, not at any of the dramatic, camera-ready moments that made headlines. It begins here in an ordinary kitchen with a can of soup and a broken drawer, because sometimes the most important things start in the quietest, most ordinary places. But to understand how a man with $800 million ended up reading soup instructions in a stranger's apartment, we need to go back exactly 24 hours. Stephen Cole was not just a superstar, he was the superstar. The kind of famous that did not require explanation. The kind that crossed languages and oceans and time zones. The kind where a grandmother in rural Mississippi and a college student in Brazil and a 7-year-old in London could all look at the same face and say the same name without prompting. He had been acting since he was 19. His first major film came out when he was 21 and made him a household name overnight, the kind of overnight that only happens after years of quiet, grinding work that nobody noticed until suddenly everyone did. By 24, his first Academy Award nomination. By 27, his second win. He was now 29 years old and by any reasonable measure at the very top of the world. He was also, on the morning our story begins, supposed to be getting married. The wedding had been a year in the making. Galaxy Agency, the most powerful entertainment agency in Los Angeles, a company that managed careers like chess pieces and personal lives like brand strategies, had engineered every detail. The venue was a converted vineyard outside the city. The flowers had been imported. The guest list read like the credits of a very important film. The dress had been designed by someone whose name alone cost money. His bride-to-be was Vanessa Cole, no relation to Stephen, just an unfortunate surname collision that tabloids had spent a year making terrible puns about. Vanessa was one of the most photographed women on the planet. She had a face that had been on 30 magazine covers in the last 18 months. She was polished in the way that some people are polished, not naturally, but professionally, carefully, like a surface that has been worked on so long it no longer remembers what it looked like before. She was also, Stephen had slowly and painfully come to understand over 12 months of their arrangement, entirely wrong for him. Not because she was a bad person. He didn't think she was a bad person. He thought she was someone who had been turned into a product so gradually and so completely that neither of them could quite see where the person ended and the product began. He understood that. He had the same problem himself. Their relationship, if you could call it, that had been designed by a board of executives who looked at Stephen Cole and saw not a human being but an investment portfolio. A marriage between Stephen Cole and Vanessa Cole would be, they decided, the kind of brand synergy that made quarterly earnings reports sing. Stephen had gone along with it. For months, he had gone to the meetings and smiled in the photos and made the carefully staged appearances. He had told himself it was fine. And then, standing at the altar, watching Vanessa float toward him in a dress that cost more than most people earn in 5 years, something in Stephen Cole simply and completely snapped. Not loudly, not with any of the drama his movies were famous for. Just quietly, cleanly, like a wire that had been pulled too tight for too long and finally, gently gave way. He turned around. He walked back up the aisle. He took the stairs to the roof. He stood at the edge. And then, because the building's eccentric owner had installed a professional emergency parachute system 3 years ago after watching one too many action movies, and because Stephen Cole had done his own stunts in 4 of his last 5 films, he jumped. He landed in an alley behind a Vietnamese restaurant. He stripped off his dress shirt, and he disappeared into Lowe's Angels like a coin dropped into a very large fountain. His manager, Eugene Foster, spent the next 6 hours calling Stephen's phone every 3 minutes. Stephen threw his phone into the Lowe's Angels River from a bridge on Alameda Street and watched it sink. And what he felt watching it go under was something uncomfortably close to relief. The phone was gone. The wedding was gone. The schedule, the brand meetings, the carefully arranged life, all of it was gone, at least for this moment, and the absence of it felt like setting down something very heavy that he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten what his hands felt like empty. He was just a man on a bridge in Lowe's Angels with $400 in his pocket and nowhere to be. He found a street vendor and bought a gray hoodie for $15. He found a diner on Grand Avenue and ordered scrambled eggs and black coffee and sat in a window booth and watched the city move. The waitress called him "Hun" without looking up from her notepad. A little kid at the next table stared at him for a long, assessing moment. Stephen's heart stopped, but the kid looked away and went back to stealing fries off his mother's plate. He had not been recognized. He was just a tall man in a gray hoodie, eating eggs invisible. The feeling was so strange and so good that he sat in that diner for 2 full hours. But eventually the eggs went cold and the coffee ran out and the real world existed whether or not he was ready for it. He needed somewhere to stay. His cards were traceable. Eugene would have flags on everyone before he swiped it. He had $423 in cash. He needed cheap, quiet, and no questions. He walked until he found a laundromat with a community bulletin board outside, plastered with overlapping flyers and business cards, the accumulated problem-solving of ordinary people living ordinary lives. And in the middle of all of it, one handwritten note, slightly crooked, with little tear-off tabs at the bottom. Room 4 rent, $600 month, quiet building, no drama. Stephen read those last 2 words 3 times. No drama. He took a tab. The building was a 5-story walk-up on Maple Street, the kind of building that had been standing long enough to have opinions about the neighborhood. The paint in the lobby was tired. The elevator had an out-of-service sign that looked permanent. The hallway on the 4th floor smelled like someone had recently been ambitious with garlic, and it smelled genuinely good. He found apartment 4B and knocked. A chain rattled. The door cracked open, just enough for one brown eye and a sliver of nose to appear in the gap. "Yes," said a voice, slightly hoarse, slightly suspicious, with the specific energy of someone who had been horizontal and was not happy about being vertical. "I'm here about the room," Stephen said. The eye conducted a thorough inspection of him, top to bottom. "You don't look like a murderer," the voice said. Stephen blinked. "I'm not." That's exactly what a murderer would say. A beat. "Do you have a job?" "I'm an actor," Stephen said. The chain came off. The door opened. And Stephen Cole got his first look at Nikki James. She was, by any objective measure, an absolute disaster, and she wore it with the complete absence of apology that only genuinely sick people achieve. Her dark hair was piled on top of her head in a bun that had abandoned its own structure somewhere around the 2nd day of fever. Her brown skin had the faintly ashy look of someone running on cold medicine and determination. She had dark circles under her eyes deep enough to have their own zip code. She was wearing an enormous oversized sweatshirt that read "Property of Nobody" across the front in faded, peeling letters. She held a mug of something steaming in both hands, and her nose was red at the tip in the unmistakable way of someone who had been blowing it on a strict schedule. She looked at him with the flat, assessing gaze of a woman too sick and too tired to bother performing anything. "Actor," she said, "what have you been in?" "Different things," Stefan said. "A few films, nothing major." She squinted at him. He kept his face perfectly still. He had been keeping his face perfectly still for professional purposes since he was 19. He was exceptionally good at it. "You look familiar," she said. "I get that a lot," he said. "I have one of those faces." She considered this for a moment, decided it was acceptable, and sneezed so hard the mug wobbled in both hands. "Bless you," Stefan said. "Thank you," she said, producing a tissue from her sweatshirt pocket without breaking eye contact. "The room is $400 a month, utilities included. My name is Nikki. I work weird hours. Kitchen is shared. You don't touch my food, I don't touch yours. Bathroom situation we'll figure out. First and last month up front." $800. He had 423. "Any flexibility on the up front?" he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. A split-second negotiation that was really about something else entirely, two strangers deciding quickly whether or not to trust each other. "400 now," she said. 400 in 2 weeks. "Deal," he said. "Come in, I'll show you the room." The room was small. The window faced a brick wall 4 feet away. The bed had a quilt that had been washed so many times it had gone completely soft. The lamp flickered on the first try. And the dresser had a drawer that didn't close all the way. Stefan stood in the doorway and looked at this small, honest, entirely unimpressive room. "It's perfect," he said. Nikki looked at him with the expression of someone reevaluating the murderer question. "Name," she said. "Stefan," he said, a tiny pause. "Stefan Hall." "Stefan Hall." She repeated it like she was checking whether it fit. "I'll print a rental agreement when I feel less like I'm actively dying." "Take your time," he said. She sneezed again. "I'm an entertainment reporter," she said. The sneeze had apparently shaken the information loose. "LA Daily Buzz. My boss has been calling me all morning because apparently Stefan Cole ran away from his own wedding yesterday and nobody can find him." Her gaze slid past Stefan absently, clearly just thinking out loud. "Every reporter in this city is out chasing that story and I'm here with 102 fever. My boss Harold told me, and I quote, 'Even if you're dying, you need to get me an exclusive with Stefan Cole.'" She made a face that was equal parts exhausted and offended. "Can you believe that?" "That sounds awful," Stefan said, in a perfectly measured voice. 4 years I've been at that paper," she said. 4 years covering that man's entire career, every film, every interview, every press tour. And the one morning I physically cannot get out of bed, the biggest story of the decade drops." She set her mug down on the counter with more force than necessary. "Anyway, you hungry? I have soup. It's from a can, but it's hot." "I would genuinely love some soup," Stefan Cole said. And so there he was. $800 million, 2 Academy Awards, the most famous face in Lowe's Angels, standing in a stranger's kitchen, reading the instructions on a can of soup, about to eat dinner with a woman who had spent 4 years studying his face and still had absolutely no idea he was standing right in front of her. That a $15 hoodie, a flickering lamp, and a can of soup was how it started. He stayed. Day 1 became day 2 became day 3, and Stefan Hall settled into apartment 4B on Maple Street with a quiet usefulness that surprised Nikki, who was used to being the only person in her own orbit. He went to the pharmacy without being asked and came back with the exact cold medicine she had mentioned needing in passing. He made soup every day, still from a can, but he added things to it, ginger and a little lemon, and something she couldn't quite identify, and it was noticeably better each time. And she acknowledged this in the clipped, minimal way of a sick person who is grateful but not yet willing to be enthusiastic about it. He fixed the drawer on the dresser. She had mentioned it once, not even as a request, just a passing observation, and 2 hours later it closed perfectly. When it slipped again the next morning, he fixed it again, without comment, without expecting any credit. Nikki thought from her position buried under a blanket on the couch with her laptop and her tissues, an unusually decent person for someone she had let in based on a bulletin board note and a general vibe. He was also, she noticed more than once, very careful about his face. Not vain careful, deliberate careful, the way of someone who had spent years being looked at and had developed a specific practice discipline around managing it. She noticed it especially when she talked about Stephen Cole, which she did often, because he was her main beat and she was always working through angles even when she was sick, and she would see something in Stephen Hall's face go very still. A specific stillness. The kind you couldn't quite learn if you didn't already know it. She filed it away under interesting and kept going. She had a whole wall dedicated to Stephen Cole. She was not embarrassed about this. It was journalism. 4 years of carefully assembled research, photographs, interview transcripts, public records, the kind of deep and detailed accumulation that separated good reporters from great ones. She knew his jawline in three-quarter profile. She knew his tell when he was uncomfortable in an interview. She knew his off-duty wardrobe, his favorite bars, his habits. She could identify him in any disguise. On day 4, Stephen Hall wandered to her bedroom doorway while she was at her desk, glanced around, and saw the wall. "What is that?" he said. "Research," she said without turning around. 4 years of it. "Of Stephen Cole," he said, reading the name in red marker at the top. "He's my main assignment," she said. "According to everything I've compiled, his off-duty signature is a gray hoodie, dark jeans, black sneakers." She turned around and her eyes dropped to his outfit: gray hoodie, dark jeans, black sneakers, and she stopped. Something moved across her face. Stephen went very still. "Huh," she said. "Huh, what?" he said. "Nothing," she said, and turned back to her computer. But she glanced at the wall once more, and then at him, and then away, with the expression of someone who had just opened a cabinet and found something they weren't expecting and had quietly closed it again to come back to later. She had not connected the dots yet, but the dots were there, and Nikki James was the kind of person who eventually connected every single one. He needed to tell her. He knew it. Every day he waited, every bowl of soup and fixed drawer and easy conversation on the couch, it got heavier. Each piece of something real they built together was something that would need explaining when the truth came out. But the truth was coming, whether he was ready or not. The ex-boyfriend arrived on a Thursday afternoon. He knocked 3 times hard, with the energy of a man who had spent the cab ride over rehearsing something. When Nikki opened the door, the first thing he said was, "I need my watch back." "We broke up 8 months ago," Nikki said. "The Rolex, Nikki. I left it here after the Henderson dinner." "I don't have your watch." "It was here, you never sent it back." "I never took it, Derek." Derek Walsh was tall, clean-cut, and carried himself with the particular confidence of a man who had been told he was attractive often enough to start treating it like a credential. He looked past Nikki, found Stephen sitting at the kitchen table with a book, and his expression shifted into something territorial. "Who's that?" he said. "My roommate," Nikki said. "Since when do you have a roommate?" "Since this week. What do you actually want, Derek?" "I want my watch. And I don't have it, so." Derek looked Stephen over with the contemptuous thoroughness of a man who has already made up his mind. "Her boyfriend," Stephen said from the kitchen table, not looking up from his book. The hallway went completely quiet. Nikki turned slowly to look at Stephen. Stefan looked up from his book with the expression of a man who has said exactly what he meant to say. Nikki looked back at Derek. Derek looked at Stefan. He was deciding something. Stefan watched him decide and watched him choose, predictably, the wrong option. Him, Derek said, louder now, performing for an audience that did not exist. You leave me for him. What does he do, Nikki? Park cars, deliver packages. You seriously went from me too. Stefan closed his book. He stood up. He was 2 inches taller than Derek, and the effect had nothing to do with the 2 inches. It had to do with the kind of stillness that Stefan brought with him everywhere. The accumulated weight of a man who had played every kind of dangerous character on screen and carried a little of each one with him when he walked into a room. She asked you what you wanted, Stefan said quietly. She told you she doesn't have it. I think the conversation is done. Derek's jaw tightened. You don't talk to me like. Show her some respect, Stefan said, still quiet. The quiet was the warning. You know what? Derek said, shifting to his closer. Keep the watch. And just so you know, once my film with Stefan Cole drops, once the world sees me in that lead supporting role, you're both going to feel really. Third male supporting, Stefan said. Derek stopped. What? They told you lead supporting. It's actually third male supporting. Different contract tier, different billing, different pay structure. Stefan said it the way you say something when you know it with absolute certainty because you wrote the contract. Read it again before you sign. Something passed across Derek's face, confusion, and then something worse than confusion, the dawning unease of a man who has just heard something specific from someone who shouldn't know it. How do you, he started. Take care of yourself, Derek, Stefan said. Derek left, faster than was dignified. The door closed. Nikki stood with her hand still on the doorknob, not moving. How did you know that? She said carefully. Know what? The contract structure, the billing tiers. How does a guy who fixes drawers and makes soup know the exact billing breakdown of a Galaxy agency film contract? I've worked on a lot of sets, Stefan said. You pick things up. Nikki turned and looked at him with the reporter's gaze, slow, lateral, sorting through what she was seeing and what she already knew. Her eyes dropped to his outfit, then moved to the wall in her bedroom that she could see through the open door, and then came back to him. Right, she said, in the tone of someone who means the opposite. She went to her laptop, but she looked at him twice more before she stopped, and both times her gaze went to the wall. 3 days later, Nikki's fever broke. She came out of her room looking like a real person again, proper hair, real clothes, the specific brightness of someone who has been sick long enough that ordinary health feels like a gift. I need to find Stefan Cole, she announced over coffee. You'll find him, Stefan said, which was technically accurate in every possible way. Harold is going to fire me if I don't give him something by the end of the week. The man hasn't shown up anywhere. No sightings, no photos, nothing. She was at her laptop, frowning at search results. I keep thinking about where he would go. He's not the kind of person who runs to another country or checks into a 5-star somewhere. According to my research, when he needs to disappear, he goes somewhere familiar, comfortable. She tapped the table. There's this bar on 7th. He used to go there a lot before he got too famous for it. Dark corner booth in the back. He felt like himself there. Stefan set down his coffee very carefully. Interesting, he said. I want to go tonight, she said. I'll take you, Stefan said. She looked at him. Why would you take me? Because I know his patterns, Stefan said. I've been on enough of his sets. I have a feeling about tonight. She looked at him for a long moment, that lateral, sorting look. Fine, she said, but if you're wrong, you owe me dinner. And if I'm right, he said. She thought about it. Then you owe me dinner anyway, because I'll be too excited to eat and someone should enjoy the food. He smiled. She looked at the smile for half a second longer than she meant to. They went to the bar on 7th Street that evening. Dark wood, low light, the kind of place that had no social media presence because it was specifically trying not to. Stefan knew the owner. He had called ahead quietly in the 10 minutes while Nikki was getting her jacket. The corner booth in the back was free. Nikki sat with her recorder in her pocket and her press badge in her bag, and the barely contained electricity of a reporter who thinks something is about to happen. They ordered drinks, they talked. He had been ready for her to be a journalist in the way journalists sometimes were with celebrities, friendly on the surface, angled underneath, every question a side door into something you didn't realize you were being asked. He had prepared for that version of her. He got a completely different version. Nikki James talked to him like a person. She talked about growing up in Atlanta and what it meant to be the first person in her family to leave the state for college. She talked about arriving in Los Angeles at 22 with 2 suitcases, a journalism degree, and the specific brand of optimism that exists only before you've been wrong enough times to calibrate it. She talked about her father, who sent her voice messages that were always too long and never quite said the thing he meant to say but were, in their indirect way, exactly what she needed. She talked about the journalism she actually wanted to do, not celebrity coverage. That was the job, not the calling. The calling was something else. Real people, communities, the stories that fell through the gaps of the big narratives because they didn't generate enough clicks to justify the column inches. Then why the celebrity beat? Stefan asked. Pays the rent while I figure out how to get to what I actually want to write, she said, wrapping both hands around her drink. And honestly, there's something genuinely interesting about it sometimes. Not the awards shows or the PR statements, the people underneath all of that. The way someone can be the most watched person on the planet and still be the least known. She paused. You can be everywhere and still be invisible. Stefan was quiet for a moment. I said something like that to you once, he said carefully. About Stefan Cole. You were thinking out loud about him, and I said maybe he didn't know who he was either. I remember, she said. She tilted her head. And I said that was a more interesting answer than I expected from a nobody who fixes drawers. Do you still think that? More than before, she said. Stefan Hall, what's your actual deal? My deal, he repeated. You fix drawers without being asked. You make soup that shouldn't be as good as it is. You knew the contract structure of a Galaxy agency film deal, and you brought me to the exact bar where a superstar used to go when he needed to disappear. Her eyes were steady on his. You look like someone I know, and I know faces better than almost anyone. Lots of people. Stop, she said, not unkind, just stop. He stopped. They sat in the corner booth in the dark bar where Stefan Cole had been coming for years to feel like himself. And the silence between them was the kind that means something is about to be decided. Do you like me? He said finally. Or do you like what you think I might be? Nikki was quiet for a long moment. I like who I've seen this week, she said. The person who got my medicine without being asked, who made Derek quietly want to disappear, who is sitting across from me right now looking terrified of an answer he already knows. Stefan exhaled. Then let me ask it properly, he said. Do you want this, whatever this is? Nikki looked at him a moment longer. Then she smiled, small, genuine, slightly cautious, the way of someone who has been careful with themselves for a while and is choosing deliberately to stop. Take me to see Stefan Cole, she said, and we'll call it a date. I think, Stefan said, I can arrange that. Harold arrived 20 minutes later. Nikki's editor was a compact man with an enormous sense of his own importance, and he moved through the bar like he owned it, which he absolutely did not. He spotted Nikki, and his face assembled the expression of a man who had arrived to solve a problem and discovered a more complicated one. Nikki, he reached the table and looked Stefan over with the quick, dismissive scan of a man calculating worth. So this is your fever. Harold, you missed the biggest story of the year to sit in a bar with. he gestured at Stefan with the specific contempt of someone who has sorted a person into a category and sealed the box. "What is this? Your sugar daddy?" "Harold, I was told." "Zero professionalism," Harold said. "Zero. You are genuinely the worst reporter I have ever." "You're early," said a voice from behind him. "I thought our meeting was at 9. Harold turned around and found himself face to face with Stefan Cole. The real one, not Stefan Hall. Stefan Cole, standing at the entrance to the bar without the hoodie and without any pretense, looking at Harold with the cold, precise expression of a man who has just walked into a situation and immediately understood every detail of it. Harold's mouth opened. It did not close for a long time. Mr. Cole," Harold finally managed. "I didn't know you were, I didn't realize." "My exclusive is for Nikki James," Stefan said. "Is she still employed at your publication?" Harold made several sounds that were not words. "Because I was under the impression she was your best reporter," Stefan said. "I'm confused by what I heard just now." "She is," Harold's voice had gone up 3 registers. "She absolutely is. She is my best, my very best. She is. I was joking. It was a terrible joke. Entirely my fault. I cherish her. She is a darling." Nikki stared at Harold with the expression of someone watching something magnificent happen in real time. "She covers this exclusive," Stefan said. "Her timeline, no pressure, no reassignments." "Of course, absolutely, yes." Harold was already moving toward the exit with the brisk efficiency of a man who wants to be gone before anything else happens. He pointed at Nikki as he backed away. "Make it good. Ask him everything. Don't just ask about his." He pointed a finger at her that was somehow simultaneously threatening and useless. "Make it count." He left. The bar was quiet. Nikki turned to Stefan. Stefan looked back at her. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said, a beat of silence. "So, you're Stefan Cole." "I'm also Stefan Hall," he said. "Both of those are true." "You could have told me." "I know. Day one, you could have just said." "I know," he said. "I wanted to, but I needed," he stopped, searched. "I needed to know that you liked me. Not the name, not the face on the magazine cover, just me, the person in the kitchen reading a soup can." She was quiet for a long moment. "You have a very unfair advantage," she said finally, "because you already know the answer." "I'd still like to hear it," he said. She looked at him across the table. "Buy me another drink," she said, "and I'll think about it." He flagged the waiter. She smiled into her glass. She filed the interview at midnight. 3,000 words, front page. Harold called it the best exclusive the Daily Buzz had run in its entire history, which was the closest Harold had ever come to acknowledging that Nikki James was genuinely, exceptionally good at her job. What the interview did not mention, the gray hoodie, the canned soup, the drawer he fixed twice, the corner booth, those belonged to her, those were not for print. But after the article was filed, after Harold had called 8 times to celebrate and she had stopped answering, after she had eaten cold Chinese food at her desk watching the numbers climb, Nikki James walked down the short hallway of apartment 4B and knocked on the door of the small room with the window that faced a brick wall. "Yes," Stefan said. "You asked me something earlier," she said. A pause. "I remember." "The answer is yes," she said. "Whatever this is, yes." Silence on the other side of the door. Then it opened. Stefan Cole stood in the doorway of the smallest, most honest room he had ever lived in, and he looked at Nikki James, still slightly rumpled from a week of being sick, soup-stained sweatshirt traded for a clean one but hair still doing its own thing, and he smiled. Not the magazine smile, not the awards show smile, the real one. The one that only appeared when nobody was expecting anything from him and he had forgotten for a moment to manage it. Nikki smiled back. If the story ended there, it would already be something worth telling. A man with everything who walked away from all of it to find something real. A woman who had spent 4 years studying a face and still chose the person behind it over the celebrity in front of it. But this story does not end there. Because while Stefan and Nikki stood smiling at each other in a quiet hallway on Maple Street, something else was happening across the city. Vanessa Cole was on the phone. And the name she kept saying very calmly, very deliberately, was Nikki James. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell, because what Vanessa has planned is going to hit harder than anything you've seen so far, and trust me, you do not want to miss it. The morning after the article ran, Nikki woke up to 432 notifications. She lay in bed and looked at her phone screen for a long moment, then set it face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. This was going to be a different kind of day. She could feel it already, the specific atmospheric pressure of a day that has been changed by something you did the night before, the day that comes after. She could smell coffee. She got up, padded to the kitchen, and found Stefan at the stove with the same studied concentration he brought to every domestic task, as though cooking an egg was a problem that deserved his full professional attention. He was in jeans and a plain white t-shirt, barefoot on the worn linoleum, and he looked. She noticed this before she could stop herself noticing it, completely at home. Not performing home. Actually at home, in this small kitchen on Maple Street, in a way that she suspected he had not felt in a room in a very long time. 432 notifications, she said. 511 last I checked, he said without turning around. It went up while you were sleeping. You checked my phone. Your phone was making sounds. It's always making sounds. These were different sounds, he said. He turned and set a mug of coffee in front of her. Harold has called 4 times. The first 3 were celebratory. The 4th one sounded like he might be proposing marriage. Harold is married. He seemed to have forgotten that. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and looked at her phone. The article was everywhere. The numbers were the kind she had never seen on her own byline before, the kind that happened to other people's work, stories with more luck than craft, stories with a famous name attached. Except this one had craft and a famous name and a truth that was difficult to manufacture, which was why it was doing what it was doing. She had written the story honestly. She had written about a superstar who disappeared not because he was troubled or reckless, but because he was tired of performing a life that had been designed for him by people who never once asked what he wanted. She had written about a man who went looking for quiet and found it in the smallest, most ordinary place. She had not written about the soup can or the drawer or the corner booth. Those were his. Those were hers. The things that belonged to a story did not always belong to the article about it. It's a good piece, Stefan said, sitting across from her. You read it. I read everything you write, he said, and said it simply enough that there was nothing to do with it except let it sit there. She looked at him. We need to talk about what happens now, she said. We do, he agreed. Eugene is going to want to manage this. Eugene has been sending me messages since 6 this morning, Stefan said. He is concerned about the sequencing. He had a plan for how I would re-enter public life, and this is not the plan. What was the plan? Controlled statement, vetted interview, carefully chosen context. He wrapped both hands around his mug. He is not pleased that it happened in a bar with no publicist present. Should I feel bad about that? He'll recover, Stefan said. He always does. The man is made of 90% professional resilience and 10% disapproval. And you're comfortable with this, with everything that's coming. Loud, he said, I know. More than loud, she said. My face is going to be attached to your name now. People are going to have feelings about that, strong ones. People have strong feelings about everything I do, Stefan said. That stopped being new about 8 years ago. He looked at her. The question isn't what they think. The question is what you want. She thought about it. Properly, the way she thought through difficult things, following the thread all the way to the end, rather than stopping where it became uncomfortable. "I want to keep being a journalist," she said. "I want the next story I write to be read on its own terms, not because of who I'm standing next to." "That's fair," he said. "And I want whatever this is to be real, not managed, not sequenced." She met his eyes. "I've spent 4 years writing about people who perform their lives for cameras. I don't want to do that." "Neither do I," he said. "That's the whole reason I'm sitting in your kitchen." She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. "Tell Eugene I'll speak to him today," she said. "But I'm not doing a joint statement and I'm not doing a photo call." Stefan looked at her with something that might have been relief. "He's going to hate that," he said. "He'll recover," she said. "He's made of 90% professional resilience." "You learn fast," he said. "I'm a journalist," she said. Eugene came to the apartment that afternoon. He stood in the small living room in his impeccable charcoal suit and looked around the space with the expression of a man cataloging risks, which was the expression he wore in most rooms. He was shorter than Nikki had expected from the photographs, compact and precise, with the still, watchful energy of someone who processed everything and revealed very little. "Nikki James," he said, in a tone that suggested he had been reading her file. "Eugene Foster," she said, in a tone that suggested she had been reading his. They assessed each other for a moment. Stefan stood in the kitchen doorway, eating an apple with the expression of a man who was going to let this unfold without his help. "The article was good," Eugene said, which appeared to cost him something. "Better than good. The exclusive was clean, the framing was honest, you didn't sensationalize." He paused. "You also didn't consult us." "I'm not obligated to consult you," Nikki said. "Stefan gave me the interview. What I write with it is mine." "The timing was when the story was ready," she said. "I don't hold stories for convenience." Eugene looked at her for a moment. Then something in his face shifted barely, just a degree, the way a compass needle adjusts when it finds north. "We're going to need to discuss the next steps," he said. "We are," Nikki agreed. "Stefan has my number, so do you now." She handed him a card. "I'm available to coordinate on things that are genuinely collaborative. I am not available to be managed." Eugene took the card. He looked at it. He looked at Stefan, who was still eating his apple with complete serenity. "You found an interesting one," Eugene said to him. "I know," Stefan said. Eugene put the card in his breast pocket and pulled out his tablet. "Fine. Here is what's happening and what we need to get ahead of." What was happening was Vanessa. Eugene laid it out in the methodical way he laid out all problems, chronologically, without editorializing, with the specific brevity of someone who understood that clarity was more useful than comfort. Vanessa had not accepted the outcome. She had been making calls since the wedding, quiet ones at first, the kind that plant seeds rather than start fires. She had contacts in every major entertainment publication. She had a publicist who was not constrained by the same standards as other publicists. "She's building something," Eugene said. "We don't know the full shape of it yet, but the materials are there." "What materials?" Nikki said. "You," Eugene said. "Your history as a journalist, your professional relationship with Stefan over the years, every interview, every press event, every time you were in the same room and someone took a photograph. She's going to use all of it to construct a narrative that the relationship started earlier than it did, that you used your access, that the article is the product of something personal, not professional." Nikki was quiet for a moment. "That's not true," she said. "Correct," Eugene said, "which will matter to some people and not to others." She looked at Stefan. He was watching her with the careful, steady attention of a man who had already processed this and was waiting to see how she processed it. "How long do we have?" she said. "A week," Eugene said, "maybe less." Then I want to know everything you know, she said. All of it. If this is coming, I want to understand the full shape of it before it arrives. Eugene looked at Stefan again. I'll need another hour, Stefan said to Nikki, and probably a second coffee. I'll make it, she said, and went to the kitchen. The days that followed were quiet and not quiet. Outwardly, the apartment on Maple Street continued its ordinary life. Coffee in the morning, Nikki at her laptop, Stefan reading or running lines for the film commitments he was slowly, carefully resuming. They had dinner most evenings at the kitchen table, and the conversations ranged from nothing to everything. From the movie Harold had called her about to the last time Stefan had felt genuinely afraid of something, which turned out to be a question she hadn't expected him to answer directly, and which he answered directly and at length, and she listened in the way she listened when something mattered. But underneath the ordinary life, the internet was doing what the internet does. The article was everywhere. The story had legs, not just in the celebrity press, which had expected something like this, but in places that didn't usually cover Stefan Cole. Opinion pieces about authenticity, essays about what it meant to choose a real life over a managed one. Think pieces Nikki read and mostly disagreed with, and occasionally forwarded to Stefan with a one-line response that was either a critique or a compliment depending on how you read it. And then Vanessa's seed started to grow. It began small, an anonymous source in a tabloid describing a long-standing intimacy between Nikki and a major client. Nothing specific, nothing actionable. The kind of thing you couldn't disprove because it was too vague to disprove, which was the point. Then a second piece, a different outlet. Then a social media account with no history posted a photograph, blurry, out of context, her face near his at an industry event 2 years prior. She had been there. He had been there. There was no intimacy in the image, but the caption provided what the image didn't. Nikki read it at midnight on a Tuesday, sitting at her desk with cold takeout and the familiar burn of a reporter watching someone misuse the tools of her own trade. She knocked on the wall. Stefan came in 3 seconds. He read the post. He looked at her. "What do you want to do?" he said. "Nothing yet," she said. "We don't respond to nothing. If we respond to nothing, we make it something." "That's the right call," he said. "I know it's the right call," she said. "It doesn't make it easier." He sat on the edge of her desk. "The anger is reasonable," he said. "Of course it is." "I'm angry too," he said, and said it quietly enough that she understood he meant something specific, not the public version of Stefan Cole anger, but something more personal and more direct. "I know," she said. "If you want to." "Not yet," she said again. "We wait, we see the whole shape of it before we move." She looked at the screen. "Eugene said a week. It hasn't been a week." "Okay," he said. "Go to sleep," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Are you going to sleep?" "In a while," she said. "Nikki." "In a while," she said. "I have work." He went back to his room. She heard the quiet sound of his door, the small, ordinary sounds of the apartment settling around her, and she turned back to her screen with the cold takeout and the climbing notifications and the specific, contained fury of a woman who was very good at her job and was watching someone try to use that against her. She heated the soup he had left on the stove for her. It was, as always, better than it needed to be. The press conference happened on a Tuesday at noon, in the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of Galaxy Agency's tower. Vanessa arrived in white, all white from her shoes to her earrings, the calculated wardrobe of a woman who understood optics and had used them her entire career. She had called it herself, without agency authorization, without consulting Eugene, without telling anyone what she was planning. She had simply called the journalists she could maneuver and said, "I have something for you. Be here at noon." The room was full. Vanessa looked at the cameras with the expression of a woman who had been wronged and was bearing it with great dignity. It was a performance. It was a very good performance. "Thank you all for coming," she said. I know you have questions about Stefan and me. The truth is that our arrangement has been disrupted. Stefan fell for someone else." The room burst, every journalist already typing. The question from all of them at once: who? Name. "We know who she is," Vanessa said, lowering her voice so the room had to lean in. "She's a reporter, a woman who used her professional access to get close to Stefan, who crossed every ethical line that exists between a journalist and her subject." Murmurs, judgment forming like weather in a closed room. "The worst part," Vanessa said, "is that she's right here in this room." Every camera swung. Nikki James had walked into that press conference with her press badge, her recorder, and the professional calm of someone who had covered events like this hundreds of times. Harold had assigned her to it that morning and called it standard damage control. She had not expected to be the story. "Nikki James," Vanessa said, pointing. "From the LA Daily Buzz, right there." Nikki stood up. "That's not true," she said. Her voice was steady. That was remarkable given what her heart was doing. "I have proof," Vanessa said, and nodded toward the side of the room where a projection screen lit up. The photographs were good. That was the first thing Nikki thought, even through the shock, technically good fakes, her face placed with precision into contexts she had never been in, the manufacturing invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. She knew what to look for. She had written about fabricated images 2 years ago and had spent a week learning exactly what gave them away. "Those are AI generated," she said. "They are fabricated, every single one of them." "She's known in this industry," Vanessa said, speaking over her, "for using a press badge to access male celebrities. This isn't the first time." The room had already decided. That was how it worked. The narrative arrived before the evidence, and the evidence had to fight for a room it hadn't been invited to. Someone in the back called her something ugly. A cup hit the chair beside her. She turned for the exit. The crowd had shifted. She was in the middle of it, phones in her face, voices from every direction. Someone grabbed her arm, someone pushed from behind. She stumbled against a metal folding chair and kept moving. "Hey." One word. "Quiet." It landed like a door, slamming in an empty building. The room went still. Stefan Cole was standing at the entrance. Not the gray hoodie, not Stefan Hall. Stefan Cole in a dark jacket with the specific dangerous stillness of a man who has moved past patience into something more decided. He looked at the room. He walked through it. People moved. They moved the way people move for Stefan Cole in real life. Not quite fear, not quite awe, but the accumulated weight of years of watching him be formidable translated suddenly into physical space. He reached her. His hand went to her shoulder, steady, checking. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," she said mostly. He turned to face the room. "Whatever contract you believe exists," he said, not loud, because he didn't need loud, "I never agreed to it. The board made decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent. I'm done being patient about it." He reached into his jacket. Eugene had been carrying the document since 6 that morning. Official notice of contract termination for unauthorized agency activity. Galaxy is voiding her contracts effective today. Vanessa's composure fractured. "You cannot, I am a star, you cannot do this." "Eugene," Stefan said. Eugene, appearing from the back of the room with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had already done it, said, "Already done." Vanessa looked at Nikki. What had been performance was now raw and real and ugly. "This is your fault. Everything. Every single thing that's falling apart right now is because of you." "Don't," Stefan said. "She ruined my life," Vanessa said, and something broke in her voice on the last word, and Nikki, even in the middle of everything, felt the complicated truth of it. Vanessa wasn't wrong that something had been lost. She was wrong about who was responsible. "You organized a smear campaign," Stefan said. "You fabricated evidence against a journalist. Nobody handed that to you. He looked at the full room. Every publication that ran those photos will hear from my legal team today. If anyone here publishes otherwise, I will make that my personal mission. He looked at Vanessa one last time, and his expression was not unkind, which was somehow worse than if it had been. We're done here. He held out his hand. Nikki looked at it. She thought about the noise that was coming, the press cycles and the scrutiny, and the weight of being attached to a name that the world had an opinion about. She thought about her byline next to a story that would now always be read in the context of who she was standing next to. She took his hand. Eugene drove them out in a car with tinted windows, while photographers ran alongside it. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The city moved past the glass, ordinary, brilliant, completely indifferent. They called me a home wrecker, she said. You didn't wreck anything, he said. Their whole arrangement was a structure built for two people who didn't consent to it. It was always going to fall. The internet doesn't know that. The internet will, he said, give it time. She turned to look at him. You're very calm. I've been preparing for this since the morning after you filed the article, he said. Eugene and I have been ready since last week. He glanced at her. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you watching the door every day waiting for it. She was quiet. You should have told me, she said. I know, he said. I'm sorry. I'm a journalist. I can handle knowing things. I know that too, he said. I was protecting you from something you didn't need protection from. I won't do it again. She considered this. No qualification, no context setting, no but just the acknowledgement and the commitment. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay, she said, but next time. I'll tell you, he said, everything, you have my word. The car moved through the city. The afternoon light came through the tinted windows, warm and golden, catching the side of his face, the line of his jaw, the light stubble she had memorized without meaning to over the past 2 weeks. What happens now, she said. Eugene manages the fallout, he said. The legal letters go out today. The publications that ran the photos will issue corrections within the week. Most of them knew those images were fabricated and ran them anyway, which makes the legal conversation a short one. He paused. Then a few weeks of noise. Then quiet. And Vanessa. He was quiet for a moment. Vanessa is going to have to figure out who she is without the machinery, he said. That's hard. I know how hard it is. He looked at the road. I feel sorry for her, genuinely, but I couldn't stay in a life I didn't choose just to keep the machine running. She turned this over. You said something like that in the article. You wrote it better than I said it. That's my job, she said. He almost smiled, among other things. She looked out the window. I want to write something else, she said, about what it's like from this side of the press badge, what it costs someone to be reduced to a headline. She paused. I understand it differently now. You should write it, he said. I will, she said, after the noise settles. It's settled. Not immediately and not cleanly, but it's settled. The fabricated photos were debunked within 48 hours by 2 independent analysts who simply had. Because that is what people with specific skills do when something appears on the internet and does not quite look right. The publications that had run them issued retractions in the careful language of organizations that understood what Stephen Cole's legal team was capable of. Vanessa's own agency released a statement that did not defend her. The anonymous sources ran out of things to say that anyone would print. And the story, the actual story, the one Nikki had written, the true one, kept spreading. It had what tabloid fabrications rarely have, which is the texture of something real. People who read it came away feeling they had met someone, which is the highest thing a profile can do and the hardest thing to manufacture, because you cannot manufacture it. You can only find it. The internet, which runs on story more than anything else, understood this story. It trended for 3 days. Nikki found this deeply embarrassing. Stephen found it delightful. This difference would become, one of the permanent textures of their life together. "People are rooting for us," he said one evening, from his position on the couch with her phone, which he had taken away for the third time that week because the comments were making her irritable. "People are projecting onto us," she said, reaching for the phone. He moved it. "Same thing, let them project." "It's patronizing," she said. "They don't know us." "They know the story," he said. "The soup can, the drawer, the rooftop. That's enough for people to build on." He looked at the screen. "There's a woman here from Ohio who says she showed her husband the article and they talked for the first time in months about whether they still knew each other." He looked up. "That's not nothing." She stopped reaching for the phone. "That's different," she said. "It's what you said you wanted to do," he said. "Find the real thing in the story and let people connect with it." He held the phone out to her. "It's working." She took it. "Read the comment from the woman in Ohio." Set the phone face down on the coffee table. "Fine," she said. "It's working." "I know," he said. "Don't be smug about it." "I'm not smug," he said. "I'm proud. There's a difference." She looked at him for a moment. "You're doing it again," she said. "What?" "Being right," she said. "It's a lot." He smiled, the real one. She looked away before it could do anything to her face. The LA Daily Buzz was looking for a new editor-in-chief. Henry Carter had arrived from headquarters 2 weeks after Harold's reign ended. Harold had been escorted out with the quiet efficiency of a building removing a hazard, and Henry was serious, fair, and not interested in internal drama. He had read Nikki's Stephen Cole exclusive. He had also, she suspected, read everything else she had written in the last 4 years. He had the look of a man who had done his homework. He announced the competition on a Monday morning. All candidates would give a public speech at the Glass House in Mia Park that Friday afternoon. The decision would be made on the spot. The candidates were Nikki James and Haley Simmons. Haley had been at the paper 7 years. She wore those 7 years the way some people wear a credential, with the specific authority of someone who believes tenure is the same as merit. She was organized and competent, and had tended a very particular resentment toward Nikki over the years, the kind that began as professional jealousy and had been carefully cultivated into something more elaborate. When Nikki walked into a room Haley was already in, the temperature dropped in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They had never discussed it directly. They had been discussing it for 3 years through every other available means: source competition, article placement, the small accumulated performances of 2 people who had decided they were rivals without ever saying so out loud. The announcement made it official. Nikki found out the same moment Haley did, standing in the same Monday staff meeting, listening to Henry Carter explain the terms. She looked across the room at Haley. Haley looked back. Everything that needed to be communicated passed in under 2 seconds without a single word. Then they both looked back at Henry Carter and took notes. Nikki had been preparing for 2 weeks. She had an outline, rehearsed sections, specific examples. She practiced in front of Stephen, who sat on the couch with the draft and gave her notes with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who had spent his entire career understanding what words do to an audience. "The second section is too careful," he said. "Careful is professional," she said. "Careful is also cautious," he said. Henry Carter did not come from headquarters to hear professional. He came to find someone who knows what's broken and how to fix it. He set the draft down. "Tell me, not from the notes, tell me what's actually wrong with this paper." She looked at him. "The story selection is reactive," she said immediately. "We're chasing what's already trending instead of finding what matters before it trends. The entertainment beat treats celebrities like content delivery systems instead of human beings, which means the coverage is shallow, and the sources dry up because nobody wants to talk to a publication that reduces them to a headline. We have 3 genuinely talented reporters being wasted on assignments that don't use them." And Harold spent 6 years optimizing for Harold rather than for the paper. So we have structural problems that look like personnel problems, but are actually editorial ones. Stefan didn't say anything. That, he said, say that. I can't say that in a formal speech, she said. Why not? Is it true? Yes, but... Is it what you'd actually do if you had the job? Yes. Then say it, he said. People can hear when you're telling them the truth and when you're performing the idea of telling them the truth. Henry Carter has been in this industry 30 years. He'll know the difference. She looked at her notes. She looked at him. She thought about the bar on 7th Street and the article she had written without a single line of PR approval. You're right, she said to the bathroom mirror, 20 minutes later while she was brushing her teeth. I know, he said from the other side of the door. I'm not going to say it to your face, she said. You never do, he said. I've started listening through doors. On the morning of the competition, Nikki arrived at the office and found her desk. On her desk was not her work. It was a pile of files 2 inches thick, Haley's assignments. 3 full pieces with morning deadlines, placed there overnight by someone who knew the system well enough to know exactly which ones would take the most time. The sticky note on top read Grace, handle these by noon in handwriting she recognized. Nikki stood and looked at the pile. She thought about going to Henry Carter. She thought about confronting Haley directly. She thought about the 3 years of unspoken competition and the 7 years of tenure being wielded like a weapon and the specific exhaustion of having to fight through someone else's choices before she could make her own. She sat down. She put her headphones in. She worked. Coffee, focus. The fast, furious writing that comes when you're angry enough to be precise and disciplined enough to use it. She filed everything by 11:30, rolled her shoulders, and went to print her speech notes. She walked into the supply room. The door locked behind her. She knew from the sound the specific way a latch catches when someone has set it from outside. She turned the handle. Locked. She knocked. She called out. She checked her phone and found what she had expected to find, which was no signal, because the supply room was in the interior of the building and had never had signal. She tried the window. One high, narrow window with a latch that hadn't moved in years. She stacked printer paper boxes, stood on them, pushed the latch open 2 inches. Not enough. Help, she called through the gap. Her voice hit the exterior wall and scattered. She stepped down. She looked at the room. She was a journalist who had spent 4 years in difficult situations, and she was not going to stand in a supply room and fall apart. But she was also going to need to solve this in the next 20 minutes, or she was going to miss the most important speech of her career. She stacked the boxes differently, got higher, moved the phone in a slow arc near the window gap. 1 bar. She held completely still. She called Stefan. I'm locked in the supply room, she said the moment he picked up, keeping her voice flat and clear. It's deliberate. I have no notes, I have 1 bar of signal, and I have about 20 minutes before Henry Carter announces a decision without me in the room. She heard him shift immediately, that quality she had noticed in the apartment, the way he could move from completely at rest to completely present in under a second. Which entrance is the supply room near? West side, ground floor, behind the copy center. Hold the signal. I'm making a call. Stay on the line. She heard him talking to someone, Eugene, from the clipped efficiency of the exchange. She stood on the stacked printer paper boxes with her arm raised, and the phone pressed to her ear, and the 1 bar holding, and she breathed steadily, in and out. The way you breathe when you are in a contained situation and breathing is the only thing you can currently control. 12 minutes later, she heard footsteps in the corridor, a key in the lock. The door opened. A maintenance worker in gray coveralls looked up at her standing on the boxes near the ceiling. Someone called about a locked door, he said. Thank you, she said, and came down in one motion and ran. She got outside and into a taxi, and the taxi moved 4 blocks and stopped. The highway ahead was a complete standstill, the specific, merciless gridlock of Los Angeles on a day when every road is a parking lot simultaneously. She could see the jam extending as far as the intersection allowed her to look. 15 minutes to the presentation. She called Stefan. "I'm out, but the highway is completely stopped," she said. "Look up," he said. She looked up. There was a helicopter descending toward the freeway median. She stared at it for 2 full seconds. The taxi driver had turned all the way around in his seat to look at her. Drivers in the stopped cars around them were getting out, phones raised. "Stefan," she said. "Eugene is very efficient," Stefan said. "You sent a helicopter." "I sent a helicopter." "To the middle of the 105 freeway." "To wherever you needed one." She got out of the taxi, leaving an amount of cash she did not calculate, and ran across the shoulder of the gridlocked highway toward the median, ducking under the blades, climbing in, and lifting away from the frozen city below, the flat, impossible grid of it, the tiny stopped cars, the palm trees, and above all of it the wide afternoon sky and the glass house in the park coming into view. She called him back. "You are completely out of your mind," she said. "You'll make it," he said. "I don't have my notes," she said. "They're in the cab." A pause. "Do you need them?" he said. She thought about the couch conversation, the words she had found without the notes, the version that was true instead of prepared. "No," she said. "I know," he said. "Stop being so sure about things," she said. "Tell me that again after you win," he said. She hung up and looked out at Los Angeles falling away beneath her. She walked into the glass house with 3 minutes to spare. Dust on her jacket from the park's grass landing strip, notes in a taxi on the 105, hair doing something from the helicopter wind that she did not have time to address. Haley was at the podium finishing, polished, practiced. The 7 years version of this speech, smooth in every place years of preparation makes things smooth. Henry Carter was moving to the microphone. "Since it appears Nikki has." "She hasn't," Nikki said from the back of the room. The room turned. Haley's face did something complicated and then resettled. Nikki walked to the stage. She stood at the podium. No notes, no outline, just the truth which she had found on a couch 2 nights ago and had not needed to find again because it had stayed exactly where she left it. She looked at the room. "My opponent has been here 7 years, she said. "That's real experience and I respect it, but I want to say something about what this paper should be because I think we've been getting it wrong." She paused. "We're an entertainment publication. We cover people, celebrities, yes, but people first. And I think we've been treating them like content delivery systems rather than human subjects, which means the coverage is shallow and the sources dry up and eventually the readers feel the difference even if they can't name it." She paused again. "I know what it looks like from the other side of a press badge. I understand it differently now, and I think we owe the people we cover and the people who read us something better than what we've been giving them." She looked at Henry Carter specifically. "If you want an editor-in-chief who knows exactly what's broken in this building and will fix it, who will hold every reporter on this staff to the same standard she holds herself, then I'm asking for your trust. A beat. I'll earn it every day. Thank you." Henry Carter stood at the microphone. He looked at Nikki. He looked at the room. "No vote required," he said. "Nikki James, new editor-in-chief." The room erupted. Haley went white, then red, then said something no one was meant to hear. Security appeared at her elbow. Henry Carter had received the supply room corridor footage that morning and had already made several calls. "That's my fiancé," said a voice from the back of the room. Several heads swiveled toward Stephen Cole, standing near the back wall in his dark jacket, looking at Nikki at the podium with the real smile. The one that happened when he forgot cameras existed. Eugene stood beside him with the long-suffering expression of a man who had given up on managing the unmanageable, and had found in the giving up something that might have been peace. Nikki looked toward the back of the room and found him and shook her head slowly, in the specific way of someone who is trying to look exasperated and has completely lost the thread of the performance. He spread his hands as if to say, "I said one true thing." He took her to dinner, a restaurant where the menus did not have prices, which she pointed out was the universal signal that this place was going to hurt, and he said she had just become editor-in-chief, so the price was the point. And she said that was the most celebrity thing he had ever said, and he said she hadn't been paying attention. The dinner was wonderful, the kind that builds in warmth as it goes, conversation that moves between light and serious without effort, the comfort of sitting across from someone who knows you well enough to follow you anywhere the conversation goes. She talked about what she was going to change first. He talked about the film he had agreed to this week, the first one he had chosen entirely for himself rather than for the brand strategy implications, and the strange lightness of that. They ordered dessert. They ordered another round of the small coupe glasses, because the first had been very good. And then the card declined. Not because of any shortage, because Eugene had been managing 4 institutional account restructurings simultaneously this week, and a flag on one specific card had not been updated when the others were. An administrative oversight of the kind that Eugene would describe later as minor and unprecedented and categorically not his fault. The card declined in front of a maitre d', and a nearby table that had just recognized Stefan and a waiter who was doing his absolute professional best with his expression. Stefan looked at the card reader. He looked at Nikki. Nikki looked at the card reader. "Run," Stefan said. They ran. Out the front door and down the steps and around the corner, Nikki pulling off her heels after half a block and running in her socks on the warm evening sidewalk, Stefan keeping easy pace beside her, both of them going 3 blocks at full speed before the laughter made it impossible to continue. They stopped on a corner with their backs against a building wall, catching their breath. Both of them shaking with the kind of laughter that is partly about the card and partly about the helicopter and the supply room and the press conference and the soup can and the drawer and everything. The whole impossible accumulation of the last several weeks, releasing all at once on a street corner in Lowe's Angels at 9:30 at night. "We just ran from a restaurant," Nikki said when she could speak. "We did," Stefan confirmed. "You are worth $800 million. Approximately. And we just—" "Eugene's going to hear about this," he said. "He's going to find out either way. There will be footage." "There is always footage," he said, and she laughed again. She put her heels back on, which was less dignified than the removal of them, and they stood on the corner with the warm Lowe's Angels night around them, and the restaurant 2 blocks back, and the city completely indifferent to both of them, and it was ridiculous in every possible way. It was also the most purely happy she had felt in longer than she could specifically name. She looked at him. He was looking at her. "Come on," he said, "I know a taco place." "Does it take cash?" "I always have cash now," he said. "Lessons were learned." She laughed and they walked. They ended up not at the taco place but back at the apartment, because they were tired in the good way and neither of them wanted anything more complicated than the kitchen table and whatever was still in the refrigerator. Stefan heated leftover rice, and she found the hot sauce, and they sat in their usual positions, her on the counter, him on the table, which she had told him not to do and had entirely stopped enforcing. The city was quiet outside the small window above the sink. The lamp in the living room made the apartment warm. "I need to say something," she said. "Okay," he said. "I've been careful," she said, "about this. About you, and I think some of the carefulness was right because I've covered enough people in this industry to know how fast things can become something they're not. She looked at the counter. But some of it was just fear, and I don't want to keep doing the fear part. He was quiet. He was very good at being quiet in a way that left room for the other person. When I was in that supply room, she said, I had about 4 minutes where I thought I was going to miss the speech and that Haley was going to get the job and that this whole week was going to end wrong. She paused. And what I thought about in those 4 minutes was not the speech, not the article, not the press conference. She looked up at him. It was the drawer. I kept thinking about the drawer. He looked at her. His expression was very still. The drawer is a very good drawer now, he said. I know, she said, that's the point. He slid off the table, crossed to where she was sitting on the counter. She was at counter height, which put them eye to eye, that rare experience of seeing him straight across rather than craning up, and each time it made the conversation feel more direct, more honest. Nikki James, he said. Stephen Cole, she said. Will you marry me, he said. She looked at him. The man who had read a soup can in her kitchen with complete seriousness, who had fixed her drawer twice, who had made Derek Walsh disappear with one sentence, who had sent a helicopter to the 105 freeway because she needed to be somewhere. Are you serious right now, she said. Completely, he said. You don't have a ring, she said. He reached into his jacket pocket. She stared at the small box. When did you? Eugene, he said. Eugene bought my engagement ring. Eugene sourced it, he said. I chose it. I've been carrying it for 4 days. I kept waiting for the right moment. He paused. And then the card got declined and we ran from a restaurant and I decided the right moment was when the moment was right, which is now. He looked at her steadily. The right moment is right now, Nikki. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. Obviously, he said. Stop doing that, she said. I learned it from you, he said, and put the ring on her finger. She looked at it on her hand in the warm kitchen light. Simple and certain and entirely right. It fits, she said. I know, he said. How did you know my size? Eugene, he said. Eugene knows my ring size. Eugene knows everything, Stephen said. It's one of the more unsettling things about him. She laughed. He smiled, the real one. They stayed in the kitchen for a long time after that, talking about nothing particular. The conversation moving wherever it wanted, warm and unhurried, and entirely their own. But here is what was happening while they were in that kitchen. In a house 3 hours away in Cedar Falls, a woman named Diane James sat in front of a television watching the story about Stephen Cole's fiancée run across the bottom of the screen. She was writing on a notepad. The pen moved slowly and deliberately, making a list, names, figures, a timeline, the specific notations of someone organizing a plan they have been developing for longer than this moment. Her expression was not the expression of a mother who was happy for her daughter. And beside her on the sofa, a man named Gerald James watched the same television and did not quite meet his wife's eyes. He had a look that Gerald had carried for years, the look of a man who has agreed to something he knows is wrong and has been waiting in the hope that it would never come up. It was coming up. They had a plan, and Nikki had no idea. Drop a comment right now if you felt something during that proposal scene. Because what's coming next is going to test everything these two just built, and it's coming from the very last direction either of them would expect. They say the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who should never need to be told how. They say blood is thicker than water. They say family is everything. They say no matter what happens, your people are your people. Nikki James had heard all of those things. She had grown up on them. The way you grow up on anything that gets said enough, you absorb it before you're old enough to evaluate it. And it is a hard, Specific kind of pain when you grow up and look at the people who were supposed to be your people and realize that the saying and the reality never quite matched. This is a story about that. It is also a story about surviving it. Cedar Falls was 3 hours from Los Angeles by highway. Nikki made the drive twice a year, usually around the holidays, usually with the slightly braced feeling of someone going somewhere they love and dread in equal measure. She had grown up in that house on Greenbrier Street, technically grown up in it, the way you grow up anywhere you sleep and eat and do homework. Her father, Gerald James, was a high school history teacher who loved his daughter in a broad, inexact way, the way some people love ideas, sincerely, but without the willingness to do the specific, uncomfortable work that love requires. He was a gentle man in most of the ways that counted, and a cowardly man in the one way that mattered most, which was that he had never, not once in Nikki's life, been willing to have a hard conversation with his wife on Nikki's behalf. His wife was Diane. Diane James had arrived when Nikki was 12, with a daughter named Ella who was 10, and the specific efficiency of a woman who had decided very early on which child in her new blended family was hers and which was the complication. She had never been cruel exactly. She had been managing. She had managed Nikki with the quiet, consistent pressure of someone redirecting a river, always guiding, always steering, never loud enough about it to be called out. Nikki had been managed right out of the house at 18 and into a life that was entirely her own, which was either the best thing Diane had ever done for her or simply the cleanest way to solve a problem she hadn't wanted. Nikki tried not to think too hard about which one it was. She went back twice a year. She sent money when she could. She called more than she wanted to and less than she should. She had told herself for years that the distance was normal, that families grew apart, that adults made their own lives, that not every parent and child ended up close. She had told herself a lot of things. The call came on a Thursday evening, while she was at her desk going through the new editorial calendar. Gerald's voice on the phone had the specific warmth that it always had when he wanted something, but hadn't figured out how to ask yet. A little too easy, a little too much careful friendliness packed into the first few sentences. "We miss you," Gerald said. "Ella has some news. Come home for the weekend." "What kind of news?" Nikki asked. "Good news. Come see." She told Stefan about the call that night. He was reading a script on the couch, and he listened with the patient attentiveness he brought to everything she said, and when she was done he asked, "Do you want to go?" "I feel like I should," she said. "That's different from wanting to," he said. "I know," she said, "but I'm going to go anyway." He looked at her for a moment. "I'll come with you." "It's fine, I can handle." "I know you can handle it," he said. "I want to come." She looked at him. She thought about saying no again, about maintaining the careful separation she'd always kept between her family and the rest of her life, the private compartments she'd built. And then she thought about what she'd said to him a week ago, no more secrets, no more pretending. And she thought about the fact that this man had sent a helicopter for her and was now sitting on her couch reading a script with his socks on and looked more at home in her life than anyone had ever looked. "Fine," she said, "you can come." "Great," he said, and turned a page of his script. They drove down on Saturday morning in Stefan's car, which was not the gray hoodie-end $15 car, but the actual Stefan Cole car, and Nikki spent part of the drive trying to prepare him for the family experience, and part of it trying to prepare herself. "Diane is organized," she said. "She's always organized. If she invited you to something, she had a reason before she picked up the phone." "What reason do you think she has?" Stefan asked. "I don't know yet," Nikki said. "That's what bothers me." "And your dad?" She was quiet for a moment. "He loves me," she said carefully. "He just loves me in the way that's easier for him than it is for me." Stefan glanced at her. "We'll be fine," he said. "I know," she said. She looked out the window at the highway. "I know we will." The house on Greenbrier Street looked exactly as it always had. Tidy, maintained. The kind of house that announced to the neighborhood that the people inside were responsible and respectable, which was true as far as it went. Ella opened the door. Ella James was 2 years younger than Nikki, and she had always been Diane's project and Diane's pride, the daughter that fit the vision. She was beautiful and careful with her warmth, and very good at performing the version of herself that rooms wanted to see. She hugged Nikki at the door with genuine seeming enthusiasm. "You brought him," Ella said, eyes going immediately to Stefan. "This is Stefan," Nikki said. "I know who he is," Ella said. She gave Stefan a smile that had several layers to it. "We've all seen the news." "Nice to meet you," Stefan said. They went inside. Gerald was in the living room. Diane was in the kitchen, which was to say Diane was listening to everything while appearing to be focused on something else, a skill she had developed to a fine art. And then a man appeared from the hallway. Nikki recognized him in the first second. His name was Derek Walsh, and the last time she had seen him, he had been backing out of her apartment building slightly faster than dignity permitted, after Stefan had stood up from a kitchen table. He was standing in her parents' living room, standing next to Ella. "You know Derek," Ella said, taking his arm. "We've met," Nikki said. Derek looked at Nikki with the expression of a man who has decided, well in advance of the conversation, that he has the advantage. "Nikki," he said, "good to see you." "Is it?" Nikki said. It wasn't a question. The dinner was a performance from start to finish, and not a bad one. Diane had clearly put effort in the good dishes, the wine that was not the everyday bottle, the careful conversation topics that steered away from anything that might reveal what was underneath. Gerald talked about school, about the yard, about a neighborhood issue with the streetlights that had been ongoing for months. Derek played the gracious guest with the practiced ease of someone who was good at seeming like something. Nikki ate and watched and listened, and the reporter part of her brain, the part that was always running even when everything else wanted to rest, kept nodding things. The way Diane looked at her too often, the way Gerald didn't look at her often enough, the way Derek occasionally glanced across the table at Diane with the micro-expression of two people checking in with each other. Something was being arranged. She didn't know what yet. After dinner, when Stefan and Gerald and Derek had moved to the living room and Ella had disappeared with her phone, Nikki found herself in the kitchen with Diane, helping clear dishes. Diane dried a plate. "We need to talk," Diane said. "Okay," Nikki said. "About an arrangement," Diane said. "What kind of arrangement?" "There's a man," Diane said. She set the plate down carefully. "His name is Robert Ogden. He owns the Ogden farm out in the county. You might remember him from when you were growing up. He used to come by the fall market. Older man, very established, very comfortable." Nikki turned off the faucet. "Okay," she said slowly. "We've spoken to him," Diane said. "At length, he's interested in a match." The kitchen was very quiet. "A match," Nikki said. "A marriage," Diane said. She was looking at the counter, not at Nikki. "It would be a good situation. He has land, he has resources, he's looking for someone." "Diane," Nikki said. "Practical, who understands the value of stability." "Diane," Nikki said again, louder. Diane stopped. "Are you telling me," Nikki said, "that you have arranged for me to marry a man I don't know?" "I'm telling you there is an opportunity. A man I have never met. You may have met him at the market." "When I was 11, Nikki said. "How old is he?" Diane was quiet for a moment. "He's 61, she said. The kitchen was very, very quiet. "And Ella's wedding," Nikki said, because the pieces were assembling themselves with terrible clarity. "Derek isn't paying for Ella's wedding. Dad can't cover it on his salary. This would cover it." Diane looked at the counter. "It would benefit everyone," she said. It would benefit everyone except me, Nikki said. You're being dramatic, Diane said. He's a stable man. He has resources. Your celebrity boyfriend is going to move on in 6 months and you'll have nothing. I'm engaged, Nikki said. I'm the editor-in-chief of a newspaper. I have a career and a life and a person who. None of that is real security, Diane said. Real security is land, property, a husband with assets. I am not a commodity, Nikki said. I am not something you sell. You left this family, Diane said, and something harder came into her voice, something that had been waiting to be said for a long time and was now out. You left and you built your own life and you barely looked back. You send money sometimes, yes, thank you, but it was never enough and you were never here and Ella was here, doing everything, carrying this family. I left, Nikki said carefully, because staying wasn't working. I left because I needed to become a person outside of this house, and I built something. I built something real, and I came back twice a year and I called and I sent what I could and I have never once asked this family for anything. Her voice was steady, which cost her something. And this is what you've been planning. It's practical, Diane said. You've always been impractical. I'm going to go get Stefan, Nikki said, and we're going to leave. Your father agrees, Diane said. Nikki stopped walking. She turned. What? She said. Your father agreed to this arrangement, Diane said. He signed the initial paperwork. Mr. Ogden is expecting. Paperwork, Nikki said. What paperwork? What did he sign? Diane didn't answer immediately. And in that pause, Nikki understood that the conversation had moved past Diane's control of it, and that there was something specific and concrete that she didn't yet know about. She walked out of the kitchen. The living room had changed. A man she didn't know, older, broad, wearing the look of a man who had arrived expecting a transaction and was slightly confused by the energy in the room, was sitting in the armchair by the fireplace. Gerald was on the sofa. Derek was standing. Ella had reappeared from somewhere. Stefan was on his feet. He had been reading the room. He had been reading it, Nikki could see immediately, for several minutes before she got there. His face was doing the thing she knew now, that quiet stillness that was not absence but presence compressed. There she is, Derek said, in a tone that was performing friendliness over something else entirely. What is happening? Nikki said. She was not asking Derek. Nikki, Gerald said, come sit down. What did you sign, Dad? Gerald's expression went through its avoidance, its studied distance. Robert is a good man, he's. What did you sign? The man in the armchair, Robert Ogden, shifted slightly. There's a preliminary agreement, he said, in the tone of someone who had not expected this level of resistance and was recalibrating. Your parents agreed to the arrangement as facilitators. It's not binding until. I did not agree to anything, Nikki said. Nikki, Diane said from the doorway, you need to calm. I am calm, Nikki said. She was. She was very calm in the specific way that was the other side of very angry. I am telling you clearly that I did not sign anything. I have not agreed to anything, and I am engaged to someone who is standing in this room right now. She gestured at Stefan. Robert Ogden looked at Stefan. Stefan looked at Robert Ogden. She's right, Stefan said. She's my fiancée. Derek laughed, actually laughed. Her fiancé isn't going to be around in 6 months. This is a business arrangement, not some celebrity. Derek, Stefan said. Derek stopped talking. I know why you're in this house, Stefan said. You need Ella's wedding funded. You've been managing your way toward that since before tonight, and I understand that might feel like a reasonable thing from where you're standing. He looked at Gerald. But what you've done here, presenting your daughter to a stranger as a commodity, signing preliminary paperwork without her knowledge, bringing her home under false pretenses, he stopped. Let the words sit. I'm telling you right now that if Nikki tells me she wants legal action, I will support that, fully. Is that clear? The room was very quiet. Robert Ogden stood up with the careful dignity of a man removing himself from a situation that had become more than he'd signed up for. "I think," he said to Gerald, "there's been a misunderstanding." He collected his jacket. He nodded once generally to the room and let himself out. Gerald was looking at his hands. "Dad," Nikki said. Her voice had changed. It was quieter now, and that was somehow harder than when it had been clear and firm. "Look at me." Gerald looked up. "You are my father," she said. "You are supposed to be on my side. I have never asked you for that in a way that cost you anything. I have never made it difficult. I have managed myself, and I have been careful, and I have come back twice a year even when I didn't want to, because you are my father and I love you." She stopped. "And you signed paperwork to give me away to a man I've never had a conversation with." Gerald's face did something painful and complicated. "Diane said," he started. "I'm not asking what Diane said," Nikki said. "I'm asking what you said." Silence. "I thought it was for the best," Gerald said very quietly. "You thought it was easier," Nikki said. "Those are different things." She picked up her coat from the chair where she'd left it. "I'm going to go now," she said. "I love you. That hasn't changed. But I need some time before I can talk to you again, and I need you to give me that time without making me ask for it twice." She walked to the front door. Ella was in the hallway against the wall, and for once she was not performing anything. She looked, for possibly the first time since Nikki could remember, exactly like what she was. A younger woman who had just watched something happen that she knew was wrong and had not said anything to stop it. Nikki looked at her. Ella looked back. Neither of them said anything. Nikki walked out. Stefan drove. For a long time, Nikki didn't say anything. She watched the highway and the dark outside the windows and the lights of other cars going in the other direction, and she felt the slow, exhausting work of grief moving through her, not the sharp grief of sudden loss, but the long, heavy grief of understanding something about people you love that you had spent years refusing to fully know. "He was supposed to choose me," she said finally. "I know," Stefan said. "Just once, just one time, he was supposed to look at what was happening and choose his daughter." Her voice held steady, but just barely. "I wasn't asking for everything. I was asking for this one thing." "I know," Stefan said. "And he couldn't do it," she exhaled. "He has never been able to do it." "No," Stefan said. "Is that," she stopped. "Does that say something about me, that my own father can't?" "No," Stefan said firmly, no hesitation. "It says something about him, not about you, never about you." She was quiet. He reached over and took her hand. She held it. "You deserve better," he said. "I know," she said. "I know I do." A pause. "I didn't always know that. I'm going to sit with the fact that I know it now." They drove the rest of the way in a silence that wasn't empty. It was full of the specific understanding that passes between people who have decided, through everything, that the other person is worth it. Worth the inconvenience. Worth the complicated history. Worth the broken drawers and the running from restaurants and the helicopters in traffic and the families that love you badly. Worth all of it. 3 weeks later, Ella called. Nikki almost didn't pick up. She stood holding her phone for 4 rings, which is a long time to hold a phone, and then she answered. "Nikki," Ella said, "I need to talk." "Okay," Nikki said. "I was wrong," Ella said. "It came out like something that had been rehearsed and revised and rehearsed again. I knew what was happening wasn't right. I knew it when Mom explained the plan, and I said nothing, because I wanted the wedding funded and it was easier to not say anything, and her voice tightened. "I am not proud of that." "No," Nikki said, "you shouldn't be." "I'm sorry," Ella said. A long silence, long enough that Ella said, "Are you there?" "I'm here," Nikki said. "I'm just deciding whether I'm ready to have this conversation." "Okay," Ella said quietly. "Tell me something," Nikki said. "Why are you calling now?" "Because Derek and Ella stopped. Derek isn't who I thought he was. He's actually not a great person, which I think you tried to tell me and I decided not to hear," she exhaled. "And I've been sitting here in this house and I keep thinking about your face when you left. And I don't want to be the kind of person who does what I did and then just doesn't say anything." Nikki moved to the window of her office. Outside, Lowe's Angels was doing what it always did, moving, humming, going about its day with no particular awareness of any individual person's life. "Ella," she said, "I can't tell you everything is fine right now. It isn't fine. What happened hurt. It hurt in a way that I have to be honest about." "I know," Ella said. "But," Nikki said, and she was a little surprised to find there was a but. "I don't think this has to be forever. I think if you mean what you're saying, if you're willing to be different, we can figure out what something else looks like. Eventually. It's going to take time. It's going to take you showing me, not just this call." "Yeah," Ella said, "I know." "Okay," Nikki said. They talked for an hour. It was not a healed conversation. It was a first conversation, the one where you clear enough ground to stand on before you figure out what to build. But it was something. In the middle of all the damage, something small and green. 2 weeks after that, Stefan stood in front of a room full of journalists. It was his idea, not to address the family situation, which was private, and which Nikki had been absolute about keeping private, but to address the accumulated weight of everything that had been said publicly about her since her name first appeared in the headlines. The Vanessa press conference, the fabricated photos, the narrative that had been built and partly dismantled and was still floating around in corners of the internet where good narratives went to get distorted. He called it a press conference. What it actually was Stefan Cole choosing to say the true thing in public with no notes and no strategy and no PR management, which made Eugene visibly nervous throughout. He stood at the podium and told the room what had happened. He talked about the rooftop, about the $15 hoodie, about a bulletin board outside a laundromat, about soup from a can. He talked about Nikki. "Before her," Stefan said, "I knew how to perform love. I'd done it on screen for years and I was good at it, but I didn't know what it actually felt like. What it feels like is this." He paused. "It feels like someone fixing your broken drawer without being asked. It feels like someone choosing you in a hallway at midnight with no cameras, no audience, when there was no particular reason to choose you except that she meant it." He looked at the room. "She has never treated me like a brand or an asset. She treats me like a person. That is the rarest thing I have found. I won't let anyone take that from her." A reporter from the third row called out, "Mr. Cole, will you invite Miss James to join you?" Stefan looked toward the side of the stage. Nikki walked out. She had not prepared anything. She walked to the microphone and looked at the room full of cameras and journalists, and the enormous attention of an industry she had spent 4 years covering. And she thought about a 22-year-old from Atlanta with 2 suitcases and a journalism degree, and an ambition that was probably bigger than was strictly sensible. "Hi," she said, "I'm Nikki. I'm his fiancée." The room erupted, cameras everywhere, someone in the front row already transcribing. "I'm also an editor-in-chief with about 300 emails waiting," she said, and the room laughed and she let them, and then she said something she hadn't planned to say. "I want to say one thing. The story about how we met, the real one, not the tabloid version, is a story about someone who jumped off a building because he needed to find something true, and I want people to hear that. Because I think a lot of us spend time performing who we're supposed to be instead of finding out who we actually are." She paused. "He found his way to something real. I'm grateful I got to be part of it." She looked at Stefan. He was looking at her with the smile, the real one, not the magazine one. They were married 6 months later in Mia Park, on a Sunday in October. Not in a castle, not on a beach, not in any of the elaborate venues that wedding planners and publicists and well-meaning people had suggested over the previous months. They were married in the park where Nikki had given the speech that got her the job, which Stefan said was poetic and Nikki said was coincidental, and they debated this pleasantly all the way up to the morning of the wedding. It was small, intentionally small. Henry Carter was there. Eugene was there, and he cried during the vows, which he denied, despite photographic evidence. A few close friends. The park's regular Sunday morning joggers, who stopped one by one when they realized what was happening on the grass under the old oak trees, until there was a quiet audience of strangers who had not been invited and were absolutely welcome. Gerald James was not there. Nikki had sent an invitation, because she was not the kind of person who closed doors without acknowledging they had been open. He had called 3 days before and said he wasn't sure he could make it. She had said she understood. She had meant it. The road back to her father was long and she was willing to walk it, but she was not willing to wait for him before she started living. Ella came. She stood a little to the side, a little uncertain, with the careful presence of someone trying to take up exactly the right amount of space. When the ceremony was over, Nikki found her and said simply, "I'm glad you're here." And Ella nodded and didn't say anything, which was, for once, exactly right. The reception was in the park too, in a rented pavilion that Eugene had quietly arranged over Stefan's strict instruction to keep it small, which Eugene interpreted as keep it smaller than last year's Galaxy Agency Gala, and Stefan interpreted as approximately 40 people. 300 people arrived. The band was playing Nikki's favorite songs, which Stefan had given to the bandleader, in a list that the bandleader later described as the most unexpectedly diverse playlist he'd ever been handed. At the third song, an old R&B track her father used to play when she was small. Back before everything got complicated, Nikki cried. She didn't try to stop it. Stefan held her hand, and the song played, and around them 300 people had the grace to not look directly at them for those 2 minutes, and it was, in its way, a perfect thing. A year later, Nikki launched the long story column. It was the journalism she had always wanted to do, long form, person first, the kind of story that followed a human being through an arc instead of catching them at a flashpoint. Communities navigating disaster, families remaking themselves after loss, people who had fallen through the big stories that everyone else was covering. The column won awards, not small ones. She read every piece to Stefan before it ran, and he listened with the full attention he brought to everything she said, and they argued about the ending of almost every single one, and she changed several of them, and she would never admit this directly, but he was right about more than she'd expected. One afternoon, Nikki was on the phone with a family in Oregon, a community that had been displaced after a series of environmental events, families who had lost everything and were waiting for systems to move that were not moving. And she took notes for 40 minutes, and when she hung up, she sat for a long moment looking at the city outside her window. That evening she said, "I need to go to Oregon." Stefan looked up from his script. "The story," she said, "these families, I need to be there in person. The weather up there has been." "I'll stay in the safe zone," she said. "You always say that," he said, "and then the safe zone expands." "Because the story expands," she said. "That's how it works." He looked at her for a moment. This woman who had gotten her medicine without asking, who had let a stranger fix her drawer, who had looked at a man in a gray hoodie and seen something worth knowing, who had stood in a press conference room and said simply, "I'm Nikki, I'm his fiancée, and I have emails to get back to." "How long?" he said. "Week, maybe 2. He closed his script. "Eugene," he said, at a volume that carried to the next room where Eugene was almost certainly already sitting with his tablet. "Cancel the Oscar commitment." "The what?" Eugene called back. "The interview, the appearance, whatever it is." "Stefan, that's a 7-time winner who has been trying to schedule." "Tell him I'm busy," Stefan said. "Busy doing what?" "Chasing my wife," Stefan said. "He'll understand. Everyone understands eventually." Nikki looked at him from across the room. You don't have to come, she said. I know I don't have to, he said. I want to. It's going to be cold and damp, and there will not be a helicopter waiting to fly you anywhere comfortable. I know, he said. And I'm going to be working. Most of the time, you'll be sitting around watching me work. I've been watching you work for over a year, he said. It's still my favorite thing to watch. She stood up from her desk. She crossed the room. She stood in front of him. Stephen Hall, she said. That's me, he said. You are the most impractical, dramatic, over-the-top person I have ever known, she said. You love me, he said. Constantly, she said. It's very inconvenient. She kissed him. From the other room, Eugene said, I'm canceling the Oscar commitment, in the tone of a man who had given up trying to manage the unmanageable and had found in the giving up a strange and genuine peace. And here is where the story rests. Not at the end, because lives don't end, they continue, and the best stories point toward something rather than wrapping around it. But here is where this story finds its rest. Gerald James would call 6 months later and ask if he could visit. Nikki would say yes. The conversation they had on that visit would be the most honest one they'd ever had, and it would be uncomfortable and long and important, and it would not fix everything, but it would begin to fix something. That is the nature of the work. It begins before it finishes. Diane would remain Diane. People don't fully change, and some distances are the right size. Nikki would accept that and stop grieving a closeness that had never quite existed. Ella would do better, slowly and with effort and not without backsliding, but consistently, genuinely better. She would call more than she used to. She would mean more of what she said. The relationship she and Nikki built would be a new one, not a repaired version of an old one, and that would turn out to be stronger. Vanessa Cole would leave Lowe's Angels and reinvent herself in New York and find work that felt more like hers, and she would never quite become the villain the story could have made her, because people are rarely complete villains. She had been shaped by the same machinery that had shaped Stephen, the industry that turns humans into products, and her story was also about finding her way back to herself. That is worth nomming. Derek Walsh would not get cast in any Stephen Cole film. He would pivot to a different career and, from all available evidence, thrive in it. Some people are simply in the wrong industry. Eugene Foster would deny, definitively and permanently, that he cried at the wedding. There is a photograph. It exists. It will surface at inconvenient moments for the rest of his life. And Stephen Cole and Nikki James would live a life that was sometimes loud and sometimes quiet and frequently funny and occasionally very hard and always, in every moment that mattered, chosen. Because that is what this story is about. It is about choosing. It is about the difference between choosing and performing. It is about what happens when you stop being the character everyone else has written for you and start being the person you actually are. It is about the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, sometimes not knowing how, and about your right to grieve that honestly, and your right to keep living anyway. It is about the fact that chosen family, the people you invite into your life deliberately, the ones who show up when you call, the ones who send helicopters and fix drawers and eat canned soup without complaint, can be as real and as permanent and as sacred as anything you were born into. It is about what Stephen found when he jumped off a rooftop. It is about what Nikki found when she opened a door. Neither of them was ready. Both of them showed up anyway. That is the best any of us can do. That is enough. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself somewhere in it, in the fight for your own dignity, or the search for something real, or the slow, imperfect work of choosing your people, share it with someone who needs it today. And if there's a person in your life who fixed your broken drawer, who made your soup better, who chose you in a hallway with no audience, hold on to them. The most important story is still the one you're writing. Subscribe for more. We'll see you next time.